Welcome to the Week 2 Go-To session. This is the second of 4 sessions we're holding this month. This week's session is going to focus on pretty practical things, meaning we're going to talk a bit about your essay that is due this coming Sunday, right? So we spent week 1 preparing for that. We did important research that's going to create the foundation for that essay, and you posted your research results, hopefully, to the discussion board that was due just yesterday, right? Sunday. So we're going to talk a little bit about the essay, and then we're going to get into issues of APA, the format style that we use, not just in this class, but you're going to encounter again and again in all of your classes at Full Sails. I like to tell people just because you've successfully completed English class doesn't mean that you're done with APA. So it's pretty important to get these foundations down now because you will encounter them again in future classes. Again, APA style is the style that's used at Full Sail in general. We have our 2 other instructors with us, Ms. Fox and Ms. Chapman. They'll be helping out in the chat, though I will ask people to try to keep the questions kind of at a minimum, and I'll just create spaces and opportunities throughout the session where you can ask questions about anything that you're confused about, okay? Let me begin by blowing up the presentation and praying against all good hope that it doesn't completely freeze up my computer, which it likes to do sometimes. Okay, that's looking good. So yeah, welcome to week 2. Let's get underway. Last week we talked about the writing process, right? One of your quiz questions dealt with that. The good thing about this class is whether you're aware of it or not, the class is sort of designed around the writing process. So week 1, we spend time focusing on brainstorming and research. Week 2, obviously, we're focusing more on the composing process. Next week, we'll get into peer review. So that's receiving feedback. And week 4 is completely devoted to revision. And of course, what we're working toward this month is an essay that explores the issue of perseverance, which is the ability for someone to overcome obstacles, right? Or someone to succeed despite hardships. All of you should have at this stage chosen an industry role model and begun research into how your chosen role model has persevered, right? Specifically how they have encountered work-related, industry-related problems and overcome them. I'll ask a question now that you can answer in the chat. How did people's research go last week into the issue of perseverance and what your role models have done to overcome obstacles, get past tough stuff, succeed despite obstacles? Good, bad, challenging? Wyatt says interesting. Brittany says a little difficult but great. Daniel says a little challenging. Okay, those are pretty good results. Remember the week 1 session that Ms. Fox held gave some advice about if you were striking out in terms of finding research. After several hours, you probably needed to pick someone different, which actually is something that Matthew details in the chat. He says he had to change his role model, but it went well after that. Okay, good. Good news. I know it's frustrating because sometimes you have that ideal person in mind, that person you really, really want to write about. But if they don't have much written about them, it becomes a really difficult assignment for the month. So yeah, part of the trick is choosing the right person. Okay, good. Very good. And here's a reminder of the writing process that we looked at in week 1. So again, if we look at this little wheel here, we spent week 1 on brainstorming and researching and investigating. This week, we're really at this kind of corner of the, it's not quite a wheel, it looks like a pentagon. Organizing our information and, of course, writing it for the essay that is due this Sunday. And I'm going to talk about that in just a few moments about what we're specifically expecting from the essay. And even though it's technically called a draft, it's actually a bit more than what we typically think of when we use the word draft. But again, I'm going to get into that in just a few moments, so hang in there. First, I want to talk a little bit about audience. This shouldn't be your first time that you've been introduced to the concept of audience. All of you have taken creative presentation, correct? And in that class, audience was kind of a big deal because all of you had to work toward creating a professional presentation where you had to imagine yourself as recent Full Sail graduates, and you had to put together the sort of presentation that would appeal to potential employers. So in order to do that successfully, you had to really put yourself in the shoes of a potential employer. Because after all, if you're anticipating their needs, what better way to do that than to put yourself kind of in their situation? And I've taught creative presentation. I mean, I'm a member of the English department, but I have taught creative presentation as well. And yeah, audience was super important because you could tell which presentations weren't quite meeting the needs of their audience. Luckily, unless things have changed, students created a draft version before they produced their final version. I could catch those sorts of things. But yeah, early on, you could see that there was sometimes information that was, okay, it was interesting, but if I were an employer, I'm not sure I would want to hear that. Maybe the personal information was a little bit too much, or the information just wasn't professionally put together. It wasn't scripted, right? I mean, to produce a professional presentation that would appeal to an employer, it has to be kind of scripted. It has to be professional. It has to meet your audience's needs. But that's no accident, right? So creative presentation prepares you for this idea that we don't write, we don't speak, we don't present in a vacuum. There really are readers who will read your information. Or if it's the case of a presentation, there's an audience, right, that's going to listen to your information. And it's a good idea to always think in terms of an audience. So I think I'm going to switch gears real quickly. Well, actually, I'll show this slide first. And this always happens. Now I can't get this stupid. Something's blocking my portion of the screen. So hold on one second. Let me move this guy out of the way and try this again. Yeah. So if we consider the question, who are your readers? Some classic questions to consider. Considering what does your audience already know, so you don't cover stuff that they don't need to know. I think this was raised last time, but you don't have to define perseverance. Your readers are probably adult enough and intelligent enough to understand what that words mean. But in addition, in general, what do they already know? Why should they care? What biases might they have about your topic? What will they learn by reading your essay? What do you hope they will do, think, or feel after reading your essay? And to kind of make this a bit more concrete, I'm going to switch gears and actually open up the assignment sheet for the essay. No, I don't want to cancel this session. No, that's not it. Is that it? Yes. So if we look at I guess this is page 2 or maybe 3 of the assignment sheet. So if you actually go into the assignment 2 activity for week 2, which is the actual essay assignment, this is the instruction sheet that I'm looking at. Okay. If we look here, kind of in this second big white block here, it says begin by choosing an audience, aka your readers for your essay. Choose one audience from the following options. By the way, this is one of your quiz questions. Okay, so your first quiz question is asking you to choose one of these 3 options and to talk a little bit more about why you chose it and how you anticipate your essay is going to be adapted to fit their needs. And I have to go quiet for a second because a train is passing by my window. Come on, get going. Okay, it's gone. Yeah, or I don't know if this name is correct. Roddy or Ratty says I'm cutting out, and Eddie's laughing. That's I live next to literally the train tracks. It's picturesque. It's kind of nice. It's really frustrating though when you're giving a live session. Okay, so your first quiz question for the weekly check-in this week is going to ask you to identify which one of these 3 audiences. Okay, so let me blow this up. You have three choices here. You can choose potential future employers. Okay, so that's similar. We've encountered that before in creative presentation. Industry connections. So just about anybody who you could imagine working in your industry, whether it's music production or game design or show production or mobile app design or digital cinematography, which I guess would be film in general, computer animation, etc., or your family. Okay, if you think of things in more personal terms. Now, the goal here is that you're not going to literally be writing like a personal letter to these people, like dear Aunt Kathy or dear future boss. No, you're not going to literally be doing that. But last week we talked a bit about flow and about how we get into the flow. And one way to do that is to make this writing assignment as practical as possible and really think about potential readers who could read what we're producing, so that we're not just writing things in isolation, so that we're thinking about others who might potentially read our work. I mean, yes, your immediate audience in some ways is your instructor and your fellow classmates, because in peer review, you'll be sharing your work with everyone. But it actually potentially goes beyond that. Okay. In some ways, this assignment isn't just a generic exercise. You're doing work into studying a role model so that you can learn more about your industries. We have people who come to Full Sail who are pretty experienced. Some people have working experience in the industry. I've had people who've had recording contracts and they're just getting a degree in music production to, I don't know, add another credential or learn new skills. But I'd say we get a lot of people who are brand new, and they're coming to Full Sail to learn about these specific industries that they want to enter. So believe it or not, this essay is sort of acting as your introduction to learning more about your industries. Right? If you don't know much about your industry, why not start learning now? And a good way to do that is to do some research. And in the case of this class, you're doing that specifically by looking at a fellow industry person, a role model, and looking at the work-related obstacles that they have had to face and overcome. In doing so, you'll learn about the potential obstacles that you might face one day, and you'll get a little glimpse into your profession. Okay, so there is something kind of sly going on where you're actually learning quite a bit about your future industry, your future profession, while doing this assignment. And because you're doing that, yeah, I mean, why not consider the potential of these possible readers? Okay, maybe your future employers won't really read this essay or industry connections, but they could. And if they were, what would they learn about you? Um, you know, uh, your essay could demonstrate your own interest in your industry. Your essay could demonstrate your own seriousness about the profession you're going to enter. I mean, anybody who takes the time to seriously research their role model and learn about the obstacles that they've overcome certainly shows commitment and perseverance on the writer's part. So yeah, to help you find the flow, to help you learn more about your industry, we'd like you to think about one of these potential audiences being who you're writing to. I'm not going to go over the rest of this instruction sheet. Hopefully, you're always opening up every document that's made available to you and reading it thoroughly. In the case of this, since it's assignment number 2, it's pretty important that you read through it because there's some more information here. I do want to highlight some information here to the left because it's pretty important, because these are sort of like what I like to call the core instructions. This little box here to the left on page 2 or 3. And actually, I've taken a screenshot of just this section because I'll often cut and paste it when I respond to student work. Because if it's not meeting these bullet points, that means that your work isn't fully meeting the requirements of the assignment. So if we look at what it says here, it says building on your research from week 1, okay, the work that you just handed in by last night, you're going to write an essay that explores all of the following. First, yes, what are those work-related obstacles that your role model encountered? Remember, you had the option of either focusing on 3 separate problems that your role model encountered and how your role model overcame them, or you could focus on just one big problem and 3 different methods that your role model used to overcome it. I don't know why, but I think students overwhelmingly choose to focus on the 3 separate problems and then just discuss one by one how the role model overcame them. I don't know why. Maybe it's because there isn't that one giant uber obstacle that that a person's role model has had to solve in 3 different ways. But yeah, I rarely, I shouldn't say rarely, but I maybe I only see a couple students every month choose one big giant problem. Most tend to focus on 3 separate problems. Harold says he had trouble during week 1 finding resources. Do you have any tips for websites or sources in general that I can look into? Harold, aren't you in my class? Your name sounds familiar. Yes. There was an activity that my class had called Research Tips. I hope you read through that. That gave a lot of information on how to research. But because I don't want to hold things up, we can talk more privately after the session is over. Okay, so back to the instructions. Yeah, you're going to look into the problems that your role model encountered and how she or he solved them. But there are these next 2 bullet points, okay, that are super important because they are part of the essay, and yet students overwhelmingly kind of either don't address them or address them just in passing. But you have to discuss what you learned from your role model, okay, and identify what problems you may encounter and what possible solutions they'll need, okay? And also how you will use these problem-solving methods as you persevere in your own degree program and industry. I really want to stress these 2 bullet points here because, again, I see too many essays where students, they only stay here, okay? They stay with bullet point number 1. They talk about the 3 problems that their role model has encountered, and maybe it's a pretty good discussion, but these next 2 bullet points aren't addressed at all. Or if they are, they're addressed generically. Okay, when it comes time to discuss what you learned from your role model and what problems you may encounter one day, and how you'll use the problem solving methods that you learned about from your role model to persevere in your own industry. I get lots of things like, oh, I learned that of the importance to work hard, or I learned to think outside of the box, or I learned to never give up. And those are sort of genericisms or platitudes. They're not very specific. They're not very concrete. They're things that I could come up with. And as I like to joke, because it can sound kind of harsh, but I actually don't mean it harshly. I mean it jokingly. But seriously as well, I tell students, if I can come up with what you just wrote in your paper, that's probably not specific enough. Okay, I know nothing about computer animation. I know nothing about music production or digital cinematography or mobile app design. Okay, but I could say things like, "Oh, I learned to work hard," or "I learned from my role model to think outside of the box," or okay, you should be much more specific than that. And it means really sitting back, clearing your mind, applying critical thinking skills. Okay, really looking at these two bullet points here and specifically answering what they're asking for. Okay, so when it says what you learn from your role models and the problems you may encounter, yeah, we expect as instructors that you'll name specific problems that you anticipate encountering one day. When it's time for you to discuss how the problem solving methods you just learned about from your role model might help you one day as you persevere in your degree program here at Full Sail, or one day when you enter the industry as a professional, yes, we'd like to see pretty specific answers here, concrete answers about what that means. And just relying on genericisms or platitudes isn't quite doing that. Does that make sense? I'm going to assume that's a yes because I'm getting crickets in the chat. But yeah, and anytime you're confused or frustrated or need a reminder, just go to the assignment sheet. Um, Again, you should be reading assignment sheets all the time. But yeah, open up this PDF and make sure that you really focus on these three bullet points here on page 2 or 3 of the document. If you're answering all three of these bullet points, you're addressing them and doing so concretely, you're probably doing a pretty good job in your paper. Okay, let me go back to the presentation. Uh, Okay. Actually, I probably should have stayed on the instruction sheet. What is an essay? You guys know what an essay is, right? In the broadest terms possible, we can think of an essay in lots of ways. It doesn't have to be what we typically think of as a school-like essay. Um, we could think of even your presentations that you made for the creator presentation class as kind of an essay in a sort of way. But yeah, what you're working on for this Sunday is more of an essay in the classic sense, okay? The essay that you've written in high school, if you've taken another college level English class, it's that kind of essay. And I apologize for going back and forth, but if we go back to the instruction sheet and look at page 1, excuse me. Okay, we get a little description of what essay means for this class. A short piece of nonfiction writing on a particular subject. Okay, and again, the assignment sheet goes into a little more information about what an essay is, right? At its heart, an essay has 3 major components: an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. If we scroll down, we get more particulars about the assignment. Is it in this document that it covers how long it should be? Yeah, here we go. The essay must be at least 700 words and no more than 1,400 words. Roughly, we think of about 250 to 300 words as fitting on a page. So we're talking about a paper that's around 2 to 4 pages. Maybe it drifts onto a 5th page. Okay. We used to describe the assignment in terms of page length, but it's perhaps more accurate to describe it in terms of length of words. It needs to be an APA style format, which we're going to get into in a moment. And I do want to make one kind of important comment here about this essay. Yeah, it's a draft version in the sense that it's not your final version for the class, but it should be the strongest possible work you can do. So yeah, don't think about draft in terms of like, oh, I know it's supposed to be 700 to 1400 words, but I only have 500 words and it's really rough and I'm not writing complete sentences, but it's only a draft. So fine, that's what I'll hand in. No, this should be your strongest work possible. Like this should be the most polished, most perfected essay that you can possibly do. Then you'll get feedback in week 3 and you'll revise it in week 4. As Ms. Fox says, this should be your very best work. Yeah, this class moves fast, right? We only have 4 weeks. It's tough going here at Full Sail, as you've probably learned, right? Classes move fast. You don't get 3 months off in the summer. You don't get it just keeps the grind keeps happening, right? Month after month after month, and time flies by, which means that we don't have time. We don't have 16 weeks for you to write rough drafts and then produce a better draft and then produce the final draft. No, your first draft should be your best, your very best effort. And then yes, you'll improve it a bit for week 4, but hopefully it should be in pretty strong shape to begin with. Okay, awesome. Let's get back to our presentation. We'll talk a little bit more about how we put the essay together. Okay, there's our definition of an essay again. How do we put this essay together? I just kind of read a little bit from the instruction sheet, which said that there should be an introduction, body, and conclusion. I think most of you know that. Hopefully you do, right? This shouldn't be your first attempt writing a paper, probably. I'm imagining that at some time in high school you've written papers before. So yes, we can think about our papers as having sort of 3 core parts, right? An introduction, a middle, and a conclusion. Some of your readings, not just the instruction sheet, but your McGraw-Hill readings should help with this. I know there are specific modules that deal with thesis. But again, hopefully this information isn't brand new to you. But we're going to review it real quickly anyway. An introduction ideally should have some sort of hook to grab your reader's attention. Hooks you probably, again, perhaps learned about in a previous class. There are lots of little tricks you can use to grab your reader's attention. Begin with an example, begin with a short personal anecdote, begin with a hypothetical scenario, begin with an interesting or surprising fact or example, right? We have all of these kind of moves that we can use to grab the reader's attention. But beyond that, the introduction is really your sort of contract with the reader. It's where you set up the expectations of the paper. The introduction tends to say general. Its real purpose, just beyond grabbing the reader's attention, is to sort of lay the groundwork for the rest of the essay. For your paper, that probably means, at a minimum, mentioning your role model and who that person is, and probably also touching on the issue of perseverance, right? So an introduction probably introduces this important information, right? That you're writing about so-and-so, this person has overcome obstacles, and that you personally have learned something from that. And then that sets up the rest of the paper where you will explore this information in more detail. And the body, of course, is where we include those details. A common problem that we all as instructors see is that sometimes students dive into the specifics in the introduction. So instead of just staying general, the introduction already starts diving into the specific examples. So after a few sentences, maybe the student is already showing their first example of an obstacle the role model overcame, but that's not really the place where that information should be appearing. That stuff happens in the middle, the body of your paper. Again, the introduction is general. It's really just kind of laying the groundwork. It's in the body of the paper that we get into specifics, like developing our ideas, right? Including any examples or thoughts that we have on the topic, and so on. Using research, okay? The research you did for week 1 wasn't just academic. You'll be using that research to add detail, to add specific examples, to add facts, perhaps direct quotes, okay, from what you've read, so that your discussion of your role model and perseverance can be as strong and specific as possible. And also remember, we're talking about one idea per paragraph, okay? And we're going to talk about that more in a second. But yeah, each paragraph should have one specific focus or topic. And finally, yeah, we need some sort of conclusion, something to wrap things up. Like the introduction, this is a pretty general paragraph, whereas the introduction lays the groundwork for the rest of the essay. The conclusion sort of ties everything up. Um, it revisits, it reminds readers of the general ideas of the essay, and it finds kind of a polite way to set readers down gently. Or as I like to say, it kind of finds a way to end on the right note. You'll have to figure out what that right note is, but that's what a conclusion does. Um, yeah, I think most of you know this information, so I'm going to kind of move forward. Oh, people are reporting problems with the go-to session today. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Some of my fellow instructors were mentioning that before the session began. I'm not having no problems on my end, but um, I hope everybody else is able to keep up. Okay. If we think about the focus of this first essay, it's pretty simple. One, you're going to discuss what you discover about your role model and how she or he overcame obstacles, setbacks, failure, etc. Okay. Two, what you learned about perseverance from reading about your role model, and number three, how you plan to apply what you've learned when it comes to achieving your own personal goals. Really, this is just a restatement of those 3 bullet points we saw on the assignment sheet. Okay, this is the focus of your essay. If you're addressing these 3 things, you're probably doing a good job. Again, these 3 points here are going to be discussed in the body of your paper, right? They'll be surrounded by an introduction up here and a conclusion down here. But these 3 main points have to be discussed in your essay. And if we're trying to achieve balance, if we're not sure how to put the essay together, it might be useful to look at those 3 bullet points and use those as organizational tools when we write the essay. For example, we can look at those 3 requirements for the essay and look at it in terms of, well, I need to address all 3 of those, okay? And maybe I should spend roughly a third of the time on each of those subjects. And there are various ways you can use that to organize your paper. For instance, if we talk about the body of your essay, if we think of point A as being the specific discussion of the obstacles that your role model overcame, okay, or the problems that she or he solved, or the setbacks that she or he encountered, we could have a single paragraph that just covers those 3 examples. Okay, we've researched our 3 different problems that our role model has solved, and we could discuss those in a single paragraph. Then we can move on to paragraph 2, where we evaluate what we learned about those examples. Okay, we can handle all of that in a single paragraph. And then we could have a third paragraph focus on that 3rd bullet point from the instruction sheet, making sure that we discuss how we can specifically use what we learned when it comes to achieving our own career goals. Okay, so there's one organizational option. We go 1 paragraph at a time and address each of these 3 main points. Or you can break things up. 1 paragraph could be devoted to discussing all these 3 bullet points. Okay, but we're moving kind of from 1 example at a time. In the previous organizational structure, we kind of discussed all of our examples at once, then moved on to what we learned and discussed all of that at once, and then moved on to how we can apply it all at once in its own paragraph. Here, we could use the organizational technique of, in each paragraph, addressing each of these separately. Okay, and then we move on to our second example. Right, so if paragraph 1, your role model overcame obstacle, I don't know, X, we discuss that, discuss what we learned, discuss how we can apply it. Then we move on to our second example, our second problem that our role model overcame. Describe it, explain it, discuss what we learned from it, discuss how we can apply it, then move on to our third example. Okay. And by the way, you can use different organizational structures beyond these if you like. The important thing here is that you have to have a strategy. And the strategy means making sure that each paragraph has its specific function, that it's focusing on 1 example or 1 topic at a time. I've had students, for example, maybe they'll have 3 paragraphs where they just describe the problem that the role model encountered and how the role model solved it. And then after they go through all the problems, they devote a couple extra paragraphs at the end to discuss what they learned and how they can apply it. That's fine as well. or I've had students, follow this model here where they kind of do it all in a single paragraph. So there are a lot of organizational structures you can use. You just have to choose one that is logical and makes sense. Emmanuel says, can we write about 3 problems and 3 solutions? Yes, absolutely. That's one of your options on the instruction sheet. I know it gets a little bit twisted because there's the whole 3 and 1, 1 and 3 thing, right? You can write about 3 separate problems and how your role model solved each one, or you can write about 1 problem and 3 ways that your role model dealt with that 1 problem, and you can get a little bit lost thinking, what is this 3 and 1, 1 and 3? But it's really not that complicated. And what you just described, is actually what most students do. I would say more than 90% of the students that I have, at least, discuss 3 separate problems that their role model encountered and how they solve those. Okay. Now we're going to get into the issue of using research as support and also APA format. You've actually been preparing yourselves for the research aspect of this assignment because you've made serious headway into that last week. Okay. Hopefully you found at least 3 decent sources that are helping you learn about what your role model has done to persevere. For my students, I know they had a reading that they had to do where I encouraged them to, it's not just about finding any 3 sources. It's about finding the best 3 sources. And I hope that's what most people did last week. You might have had to read 5, 7, 10, or at least skim through a number of articles to find those best 3. But once you find those best 3, one of which should come from the Full Sail Library, then you're in pretty good shape because then you have the research needed to put your essay together. And you're going to use that research as support in your essay. It might be in the form of a direct quote. It might be in the form of facts or statistics that you learn from your readings, but you should be drawing upon your research when you write your essay. After all, I doubt most of you are experts in your role models to begin with, so you should be relying on that research to add detail and support. And the best way to explain how you might incorporate research when you write your essay is to go through an example, and we're going to use a metaphor here to describe that incorporation process. So we're going to use a sandwich. I hope people aren't hungry, but we're going to use the metaphor of a sandwich for what you should be doing when you incorporate research into your paper, because it really is much like a sandwiching technique. And we actually call it the quote sandwich. We're going to specifically look at how to incorporate direct quotations, but this same information applies to even if you're not directly quoting. If you're paraphrasing, if you're including facts or statistics, okay, the same technique applies. But we're going to use a direct quote. First of all, there's something called the setup, and the setup is similar to the top slice of bread in your sandwich. Okay, that top slice is it's your main idea. It's what you have to say about something. It's what you're already saying in your paragraph as you prepare for the arrival of the quotation that's going to appear. Okay, as it says here in the slide, your quotation is going to support the point that you're already making on the page. So if we use the actual topic of a sandwich, you're not going to be writing about sandwiches, but let's imagine an essay that does. Imagine that as I'm writing my paper, I'm making this point. A BLT is extremely hard to resist because humans are chemically drawn to bacon. Okay? That's the point I'm making. And now I'm getting ready to kind of support that point. I'm going to bring in a direct quote that helps support that point. But before I can get to the direct quotation, we have a little bit more preparing to do. And this is kind of like adding the other elements that might appear in a sandwich. For example, the tomato. If we think of a tomato, that's sort of in this metaphor, it's like introducing the author of the quotation. Okay, we don't just drop quotations out of the clear blue, right? There's nothing more shocking or surprising to a reader than to make your way through a paper and you're reading, and then boom, a quotation just appears out of nowhere, or a fact appears out of nowhere. That's really sudden. That's really shocking. We need to ease our readers into this information. And a good way to do that is to introduce the actual quotation author. We shouldn't leave the reader guessing as to who is speaking. So let's clearly identify the author, which is what we do here. According to Ellen Roberts, okay, so that's the author. Now, we could stop there, but who is Ellen Roberts, right? I don't know. Ellen Roberts doesn't sound like a household name. Maybe we should define who that person is. So this is like adding another piece of the sandwich. In this case, the lettuce, which is providing the author's credentials or authority, which shows that you are citing a seasoned expert in the field. So according to Ellen Roberts, head of public engagement at the Center for Life in Newcastle. That sounds impressive, right? You read that and it sounds like I could trust that person. She probably knows what she's talking about. Um, Again, we're preparing readers for the quotation that's going to come. Then finally, yeah, the quotation itself comes. This is like the meat. It's the good stuff. It's the author's exact words. You have to make sure that it's relevant. There's nothing, again, more awkward than a quotation that appears out of nowhere or a quotation that just isn't important. Maybe it says exactly what you've already said on the page, so why do you need a direct quote stating that? Or maybe it's completely off topic, or maybe it just clearly reads like a quotation that's been dropped in for no reason other than, hey, the instructor wants research, so I'm just going to throw in this quotation. No, it should be backing up the point you're making. Right, so we've already made this point. A BLT is hard to resist because humans love bacon, so we're going to put in a quotation that reinforces that. And here's that quote. The smell of sizzling bacon in a pan is enough to tempt even the staunchest of vegetarians. There's something deeper going on inside. It's not just the idea of a tasty snack. There is some complex chemistry going on. Okay, do we get that? That's like a really nice quote. It's supporting what we've said, but in a much more vivid, detailed, and authoritative way. So, yeah, that's awesome. But we're not done. We're missing the quotation marks. So this is like the condiments, right? We're not done with our sandwich. We need to add a few final things. Don't forget the mayo, the quotation marks. Go around your direct quotation. And this might seem obvious. A lot of you right now are saying, oh, well, duh, of course we need quotation marks. You'd be amazed how many students I see, they don't use quotation marks. And that leads to a problem. A big problem. Anybody have any idea what that problem is? When we don't put quotation marks around a direct quote, we just leave it like this. Well, I'll answer the question. Yeah, I mean, Daniel answered it. There we go. Plagiarism, right. Even though we've said it's from Ellen Roberts. We've got another train passing by. Even though we've identified Ellen Roberts, still, it's plagiarism. You might be thinking, well, I've cited someone and I've described who she is. How can that be plagiarism? Because if you don't put quotation remarks around someone's direct speech, you're suggesting that, okay, this is what Ellen Roberts said, but this is my language, right? If there aren't quotation marks around here, you're suggesting that this is your wording, not hers. So yeah, we need direct quotations around anybody's exact words. And that doesn't just include, a long section like this. This also includes, like, if you just took, let's say, 3 or 4 words here, like the words enough to tempt the staunchest of vegetarians. Okay, even if you use that single phrase, you need to put that in quotation marks. As little as 2 to 3 words that aren't your own, if they come from someone else, need to be put in quotation marks. So please, please, please keep that in mind, because you're in danger of at worst suffering a severe penalty, or maybe even receiving a 0 on a paper if there are instances of plagiarism, even if they're accidental. So yeah, please keep that in mind. Any words, even if it's just 2 or 3, if they're not yours, put them in quotation marks. Okay, just to be safe. Throw quotation marks around stuff. You don't want to get into trouble for plagiarism, even if it's accidental. And if you do paraphrase, the paraphrase has to be completely different. So if you wanted to take Ellen Roberts' words here, and I don't know why you wouldn't just use her direct quote here, because it's pretty awesome. But let's say you tried to paraphrase things in your own words, like, it would have to have no similarity to hers. You would have to find some clever way to communicate this idea without it using the same words that Ellen Roberts used. So yeah, be careful. But here we've put quotation marks around, so we're good. But we're still not done. We're almost done. We also we don't just leave the quote hanging. Okay. That's something that I see often. Students put the quotation in and then they just leave it there. No, we should comment after the quote. And this is like the bottom slice of toast. Okay, we should explain the quotation's relevance. We should follow up the quotation with our own commentary. Okay, you picked that quotation for a reason, so you should have something more to say to follow it. And here's an example of that, right? Bacon's feels not just in the taste buds, the scent actually permeates the brain with chemical messages that scream, I'm yummy. So there's the quotation sandwich. We still have a little cleanup to do, but in essence, this is what we're working toward. Okay, we're writing along, we're communicating our own thoughts. We prepare readers for the quote, ideally by mentioning the author of the quotation, and then presenting it, and then following it with our own commentary. And you can see the sandwiching technique, right? Because here's the actual quotation, and it's got stuff before it and after it. That's why we call it a quote sandwich, because a quote is always sandwiched in between other pieces of information. We're not completely done because we need a citation, right? We've done everything good. We've set up the quote properly. We've put it in quotation marks, but we're not done. We need to actually add information. This is kind of like the napkin we use for cleanup. And this is where the InText citation comes into play. It tells readers where this information specifically comes from. Yeah, we know it's from Ellen Roberts, and we know who Ellen Roberts is, but we're still not finished. And here's what this would look like. Real quickly, anytime we mention the author's name in the actual paragraph, we immediately put the year of publication in parentheses. Okay, so in this case, it's 2009. And after the quotation is delivered, we put a page or paragraph number. Right. The reason I say page or paragraph number is because for traditional sources, for example, some of the stuff that you found through the Full Sail Library that came from a journal, maybe had a PDF file, you'll have actual page numbers, but there are documents out there that don't have page numbers, especially a lot of the online information where it may be a single article that you have to keep scrolling down to read, so there aren't page numbers. In that case, you would just count the paragraphs to find which paragraph it's in. Okay, so we use a page or paragraph number. And there we have our complete citation. Okay. There's another piece. Actually, if we think about APA format, it kind of covers three broad areas. One is formatting or layouts. So this means things like creating a cover page, making sure that the document is double spaced, that there are inserted page numbers, that there's a header, all that kind of stuff, right? That margins are set properly. So issues of layout and formatting. Then there's the matter of InText citations, which we just covered, which is anytime you use a quotation. And actually, I'm going to skip past that because that was a mistake. There's the InText citation, which we just showed. And there's the final reference. Okay, this is what appears at the end of your paper. So the InText citation is kind of a shorthand that we do right there in the moment. So we deliver a quotation or we deliver a fact or statistic, and we immediately make sure that we name the author, the year of publication, and a page or paragraph number. But we include more detailed information at the very end of the essay. Okay, and here's an example of what such a reference would look like. Okay, there's Ellen Roberts. There's the date of her article, right? The title of that piece. Where we got it from, etc. So 3 pieces, okay? Layout, InText citations, and an end of the paper references page. It's not called a works cited page. It's not called a bibliography. It's simply called references. Hold on, I'm having trouble here. Oh, I know, it's because I'm accidentally clicking on the link. Hold on, bear with me. Okay, citing research, it's important, and the reasons should be obvious. I mentioned one already, the issue of plagiarism, but that's not really the reason why we need to cite. I mean, the reason why we cite isn't because, oh gosh, I hope I don't get in trouble for plagiarism. Plagiarism is just one of the unintended outcomes that can possibly happen. Really, there are much more important reasons why we need to cite, and they'll probably sound pretty obvious as I mention them. And as I mention them, either jot them down or commit them to memory because they are part of your weekly check-in quiz, because it's one of the questions why it's important to cite. One of those reasons is, yeah, it's important to give credit to other people. Okay, other people have helped us write this paper. We're drawing upon their facts, their informations, maybe even their direct words, so we need to give credit for that. That's important. A second reason why it's important to cite research is that it reflects back on us. We look more professional. We look more prepared. We look more ethical. As writers, we just become more trustworthy. We tend to trust or put faith in what you've written if you're relying on intelligent research to back up what you're saying. Okay. And a third important reason is simply that other people may want to use the information that you've used. So by following proper formats, such as using InText citations and having a references page, that's a really easy way for others to find your information. So think of those three big pieces. We need to give credit where credit is due. It reflects back on us because it makes us more professional, trustworthy, and other people might want to use the information that we've used, and it's a simple way for them to find that information. And yeah, if you want to mention plagiarism, I guess that's kind of a fourth issue. But yeah, we've already been getting into issues of APA. Has anybody here used APA format, or are people much more familiar with MLA? Probably you've used MLA if you've taken English in the past. Though occasionally I have some people who've encountered APA before. Okay, everybody's saying MLA. Eddie says yes, but I don't know if that means okay. APA. Here's the good news. Well, there's bad news and good news. The bad news is APA is in some ways significantly different than MLA. The good news is that all these style systems are working toward the same goal, which is just having an organized set of rules for how we share information that comes from outside sources, right? So even though APA specifics might be different than MLA, it's the same thing in the sense that when you first encountered MLA, it probably was maybe a little bit confusing. You probably had to study examples. You probably had to familiarize yourself with this completely new system that you had never encountered before. Okay, well, APA is pretty much the same thing. I had never encountered APA before I came to Full Sail. Never. But I learned it pretty quickly because it really is using the same logic. The rules might be different, the specifics might be different, but it's doing kind of the same thing. And that's what this slide details here. Citations are not difficult, but they do require attention to detail. And I'm going to point you in a number of different directions where you have APA tools at the ready to help you. But yeah, remember that. It's not difficult, but it does require some effort and attention. And that the purpose of APA is to give credit to sources in a logical, globally understood way. Right, because if everybody just made up their own rules for how they want to present information, that would be chaotic. So when everybody follows the same set of rules, it's much easier to follow. Understanding how to cite sources will help you in your future career. That's a hard one to sell to students because students always tell me, well, I'm never going to use APA in my life. I'm a music producer. I'm a digital cinematographer. When am I going to use APA? And yes, the truth is you'll never use APA, but you will have to follow sets of rules. I don't know if we have any graphic designers or web designers here, but lots of times you'll be working for a firm that has a specific in-house style. Right? You can only use this font, or you're not allowed to use these colors because it's not part of our in-house style. I don't care what industry you're working in, music production, mobile app design, show production, you all have rules to follow. Right? Even if you're working in an office and you have to send an inter-office memo, you don't just get to make up your own your own format. There's usually a specific format or even a template that you can use. So yeah, you're going to encounter rule guiding systems in the future in your careers. So in that sense, being able to follow APA is helpful and useful. Again, students don't believe me, but they believe me later. So that's all that matters. And each citation is made up of two parts. We've covered that a bit, but I just want to reinforce this. You must have both. There's the references page citation, which again occurs at the end of your paper. So this is a completely separate page. As a matter of fact, you should be, so when your essay ends, right, whenever your conclusion appears, you should be like hitting enter until you hit a brand new page, and that's where your references page appears. This is where you include the full detailed information about your source, like we looked at it with that example of Ellen Roberts, right? It had her last name, first initial, it had the year and date in parentheses, it had the title of the article, it told where the article came from, etc. So full detailed information. And yeah, we've already mentioned this. It allows your readers to find that source and investigate further if they wish to. And finally, whether you've copied words from a source or used ideas or information, in other words, paraphrasing, you have to cite that source on your references page. Okay, so any information that's being used to inform your paper needs to appear on that references page. And if we think of the references page, okay, it's really a matter of just covering these kind of basic questions: who, when, what, where. The only thing that's missing is the why. So who, when, what, where, right? So who, the author's name, always last name, first initial. When goes in parentheses. That's the date of the article. What, right? So what's the title of the thing that you're citing? And then where does it come from? This is where we include information like the title of the journal or magazine, additional publishing information. So that might be volume information, issue information. If it comes from online, that would be a URL, right, where it comes from. And here's an example. This is an example of a film, which I don't see too often, but some of you might be citing documentaries. Or maybe your DVD comes with a director's cut or a director's commentary that's useful for your role model. So here's an example of a full reference. In this case, it's for a film. And yeah, the second part, so one is the references page. The other part, you have to have both, is in-text citations, which again, we just covered, but just give some more quick information and examples. This goes directly in your essay. Again, it's that kind of shorthand tool that we use, that anytime we quote something, anytime we reference something from our research, we need a citation right then and there. They're short because we don't want to interrupt the flow of the writing. Sometimes I see students drop in entire URLs in the middle of the paper or tons of information that actually belongs on the references page. Yeah, that's not an in-text citation. In-text citations are short. And they go in parentheses. Immediately after the quotation, typically. And they help identify ideas and words that come from outside sources, right? So anytime we see parenthetical information that appears in the text of our actual essay, yeah, that's a clear signal that research is being cited. And it matches or aligns with the references page. So actually, if we think back to that Ellen Roberts quote that we looked at about bacon, right? We see her name, we can immediately go to the references page, find her last name, Roberts, and there's the full information for her. So yeah, the two parts go together. You have to make sure that you have both of them, the in-text citation and the full information on the references page. And if we think about in-text citations, they really just deal with the limited set of questions of who and when. Okay, right? So when we looked at Ellen Roberts, it was just Roberts in the year 2009. Or let's imagine someone, an author named Watkins, right? Watkins, 2014. And here's some examples. I think one of the things that kind of mystifies students and sometimes confuses them, and I admit this is a challenge of APA, is that you sort of have options. I don't know. Do students still remember those Choose Your Own Adventure books? Do they still make those? Back when I was a kid, they were really popular. There were these books that you could read like the first page, and at the end of the first page, it would say, if you want to enter the castle, go to page 25. If you want to, I don't know, face the dragon, go to page 70. And, okay, people are saying they still exist. And when you were a lazy student like I was, you would just choose whatever option got you to the end of the book fastest. And then you choose that for your book report, so you could actually do a book report on a book that you didn't even read. Captain Underpants. Those books do that? I actually bought my son a Captain Underpants. I didn't know those were sort of like Choose Your Own Adventure. Okay, too much information. Choose Your Own Adventure means that, yeah, you reach the bottom of the page and you have two options. You can go to page 25 or page 75. APA is kind of like that too. For in-text citations, you actually have two options for how you want to do it, and that kind of throws students for a loop. because you could save the important information for after the quotation, Watkins 2014, for example. But if you think back to the Ellen Roberts example we gave, it was more, it had more in common with the second example, right? And that sometimes can confuse students, that you always have two options. You can mention the author in your actual sentence. And if you do so, again, immediately, as soon as that author's name appears, you have to put the year in parentheses. That's not an option. Okay, so whoever your author is, if you decide to mention them in your actual sentence, a year immediately has to appear. Then after the quotation appears, then you put a page or paragraph number. Okay, that's for a direct quote. Or you can save everything for the end. And then, yeah, that can be confusing. And the best thing I could say is it will make sense to you once you read through the APA documents that I'm going to show you in just a second. It's also going to make more sense when you're actually writing your essay. You'll be able to tell how important it is to mention the author's name in your sentence or to save it for after. Sometimes it feels like, in the case of Ellen Roberts, she seems like a pretty important name with a pretty important title, so it seems important to mention her name in the sentence. But other times you may just, and again, you'll notice this feelingly. You might be dealing with a staff writer who just isn't that super important, and to mention their name in your sentence probably wouldn't add much authority. So maybe it's a better solution to just find a natural way to present the quotation and then save the important information for after the quotation. You kind of have two different options. And I actually, why don't I go to the APA information that you have at your fingertips now, because this is going to probably scare you a lot less. And I'm actually going to show this website too. So actually, let's switch gears. And we're almost at the end of the session. I'm trying to keep this as close as I can to an hour, but this is important, so hang in there, okay? Okay, so you have this one, APA Basics. By the way, this all comes from here. This is assignment number 2, Composing with Care. Actually, your version is going to look more like this. Okay, so from the student's end, you see something like this. And then for downloads, right, which will take you to the bottom of the page, you have all this stuff. So this kind of awkward looking title, Instructions Composing with Care. That's the actual assignment instructions, so make sure to read those. But then you have 2 APA tools here, and one of them is this APA Basics PDF, which if you spend some time going through it, it's probably a little bit awkward to read beginning to end, but it's filled with lots of examples. It also explains what APA is and how it differs from MLA. But yeah, it gives lots of different examples, and it's probably, I don't know. I mean, use this document however you wish, but it's probably more useful for you to maybe read through the original explanatory information and then just find the examples that match what you need. It's probably a little bit awkward to read through from beginning to end. But if you go through the entire thing, or mostly, your APA questions will be answered, and it will seem less mystifying. Second, you have a visual guide to APA format, which is found. That's the rubric. That's another tool you have. Read through that too. There are too many students who never look at the rubric, so they don't understand what they're getting awarded points for. For example, APA style, you're getting a whopping 20 points for APA. So that's, as I tell students, those are the easiest 20 points to earn, or the harshest, most painful 20 points to lose. Okay, so you actually do get graded on APA format. So it's important that you spend some time with it. But you have this visual guide to APA, and it shows an example of what your paper should look like, and it explains things along the way. So it explains what your header should look like. And if you're not sure how to create a header, you get some instructions here about how to do that. Okay. It tells you, for example, all margins should be set to 1 inch. And I'm not going to go through everything on here, but it includes not just information on what needs to be included, but often little instructions on how to do it. Right? Your font should be 12-point Times New Roman. That's for the entire document from top to bottom. And as we continue throughout, you get more of these little details and explanations and instructions, so that you make sure the layout and the format of your paper is adhering to APA style. But even though this sample is written in what looks like Latin, You do get examples of what in-text citations look like, so that's important to study as well. So if you watch today's lecture and you're thinking, wow, that quote sandwich thing, it made sense at the time, but now that I'm thinking back on it, I'm still a little bit lost. Even this document here can help you see what it looks like in sort of a real-world example or semi-real world example. Same thing with the references page. Okay, it's all in gibberish, but still, format-wise, you can see what it looks like and what you're supposed to do. And this, used in conjunction with the APA Basics PDF, covers pretty much everything. Oh, and finally, your McGraw-Hill chapters. Those are some pretty excellent chapters on APA. I've read through them. There's one about how to incorporate information, right? How to incorporate research. So again, if the quote sandwich example just seemed either too quick or too limited or too singular, you can learn more about this information from the McGraw-Hill readings. We don't check to see if you're keeping up with the readings. I don't believe we have a way to check to make sure that you're keeping up with the readings, but you have a lot of nice APA chapters in McGraw-Hill. And the good thing about McGraw-Hill is that they're pretty short and they're pretty concise, and they explain things really, really nicely. I got another train passing. And finally, there's this website, which I encourage you to jot down. I'll go ahead and type it into the chat as well. So you can just probably type on the link, projectapa.info. Okay. This is a website that was made by a fellow Full Sail instructor in the English department. It's also an APA resource. So if you go to the top menu here, you get things like InText Citations. Right, so all you need to do is click, and you can get more explanation. And she also covered, for example, this is what I just mentioned, right? You always have two formats to incorporate a quotation. So if that sounded confusing to you, you could mention the author in your sentence, or you could save it for the end. She's explained how to do the two different formats. So you get examples of that. You get examples of the references page. Okay. You have all the tools at your fingertips, okay? You have those two APA PDFs. You have the McGraw-Hill chapters. You have this website, projectapa.info. Like the slide said, it's not difficult, but it does require you to spend some time. And I don't know, maybe it's going to require you to spend that initial hour, really learning APA. But once you get it down, it's a breeze. I think I can speak for Miss Fox, Miss Chapman. Once you get it down, it's like it's second nature. It's so easy, you'll never forget it. And then in your future classes, because as I said at the beginning of the session, you won't escape APA. You'll encounter it again in your future classes here. Once you get it down, you've got it down for life. So why not just learn it now? Spend that hour, go through those documents, go through those McGraw-Hill readings, and really make sure that you understand APA. Okay, I think I've covered just about everything that I wanted to. Miss Fox or Miss Chapman will remind me if I forgot to cover something. But I think we're near the end. So questions, comments, things that we're still unclear about, now's the time to ask. However, if you don't have questions, if everything today was just crystal clear, incredibly lucid, you are allowed to go and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And I thank you so much for attending. But yeah, I'm going to hang out for a little bit and answer questions, because there must be questions. Lots of stuff covered. You're welcome, Daniel. Okay, you're welcome. Okay, Eric thinks he has a question, but he has to go find them. Emmanuel says, can you please put the slides on platform? I didn't take screenshots. Yeah, I mean, Emmanuel, we have a better solution, which is that the session is recorded. So it should be uploaded and posted in the week 2 lecture activity. Hopefully pretty quick. I tend to have pretty quick uploads. And then you could watch the video to your heart's content. can go back and forth. You can skip parts that you don't like. Roddy says, is this due by Sunday? If you mean the essay, yes. Sunday at midnight. Wyatt says, so with InText Citation, what is an attributor in text citation? What is an attributor in text citation? I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, but if you mean, I think you're referring to the quiz, right? There's a quiz question. And yeah, the wording sometimes confuses students. I actually send out a message that better explains what the questions are asking for. It's basically asking you to show that you know the two different ways to incorporate an in-text citation, right? So we just kind of looked at it briefly here. I discussed it in the session, but we're really talking about these two different formats, right? That you can mention the author in your actual sentence, deliver the quote, and then save a page or paragraph number for afterwards, or you can save everything for after the quotation.
I'm going
the
to
first draft,
jump in
right?
here
Yes,
real
yes,
quick.
yes. But again, draft means your best possible work. It doesn't mean rough draft. Okay, Wyatt, you're welcome. At least I think that's what you were asking. I'm pretty sure, right? Isn't that what he was talking about? There's a quiz question that asks for an attribution style in text citation and an end of the sentence. I think that's how the quiz words it. And yeah, that one always confuses students. Attribution phrase style in text citation. Yeah. It's basically these two different formats. They're choose your own adventure. Think of it like that, Wyatt, right? You always have two options for how you can handle an in-text citation, um, which actually makes complete sense, but it's confusing to people who are new to APA. And MLA, you don't have those two options. MLA, there's only a single way to handle an in-text citation. But in APA, you have your choose your own adventure. You can do it this way or you can do it that way. So the quiz is asking you to make sure that you know how to do both ways. And again, spending some time with the APA documents, this APA website, the McGraw-Hill readings, honestly, it's going to make everything crystal clear. Okay, good. Any other questions? Yes, go to Subway and get a sandwich. Uh, Chelsea says, do you only need one quotation section in your essay? There's no official limit on number of quotations. The idea here, Chelsea, is that you should be incorporating research. Research can take lots of forms. It doesn't mean a direct quotation. I mean, often it does, but maybe you just don't have an awesome direct quotation. But hopefully, there's something that you'll either paraphrase, or maybe there's a fact or statistic, or maybe there's just information that you'll put in your own words, but it came from research. Like you would never have known it if you hadn't researched. You still follow these rules, right, for in-text citations, even if you're not directly quoting something. Eddie says, when do we get our grades? I'm not sure which grades you're talking about. Oh, another train. I don't think, Eddie, you're not in my class, right? Okay, good. That would have been embarrassing if I didn't remember. For students in my class, I'm still making my way through the week one check-ins. I apologize. I just didn't get to them this weekend. They'll get done tonight. And then tomorrow and Wednesday is going to be my day to go through your research. Because if you get that by the end of the day, Wednesday, I think that gives you still enough time, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, to get useful feedback to be able to use it to write your essay. So that's my goal. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording because it looks like the questions have been slowing down. It's going to be a really, really dull portion of the video for people to watch this. So for people watching, adios. Thanks for attending. I'm stopping the recording now.